Welcome back to the Autoblog podcast. I'm Greg Migliore. Joining me today, partially from Chicago, is news editor Joel Stocksdale and road test editor Zach Palmer. They just attended the first auto show in over a year and a half. Chicago was actually the last auto show before the world sort of totally turned on its ear. But now it's back, and it's the first one. Zach is still in his hotel room, about ready to board a train to head back to Michigan. And Joel already has crossed the border back into Michigan and is at home, probably waking up a little tired, I would imagine. But guys, how's it going?
It's good. I'm looking across the way. My hotel room has a nice view of Lake Michigan, and it looks like there's a bit of a seaport with some nice boats in there. So the view is considerably better than normal for the podcast, I'd say.
Chicago's a great town. I actually have been looking at just thinking to try and get over there for a weekend myself, take the fam, have some fun.
It's good. It's actually super light right now. We drive along the streets and it's nowhere near the usual tourism or hustle and bustle that you normally see, which makes a certain amount of sense because a lot of people are still working from home. They don't have to drive back and forth in taxis or take Ubers everywhere, and the streets are just quiet.
Joel, speaking of the streets, you took them and got out of Chicago and drove back to Michigan last night, which probably speaks to how quick the show was, which we'll get into. But yeah, what did you drive back, Joel? What car did
Genesis
you drive back?
G70.
Oh, the G70. Okay, all right, that's a nice car to take back. Good road trip for the summer.
Yeah. It's comfortable, and this one's got the 3.3 liter twin turbo V6, which is a little sledgehammer of an engine.
Heck yeah, it is. Heck yeah, it is. I totally aside, big fan of what Genesis is doing as far as their looks, their powertrains, and their styling. They're really just going for it, and it's really, I think they're really pulling it off. But let's talk about the Chicago Auto Show. Basically, there are two reveals, as we were talking about off camera here. Some Volkswagen news and the Jeep Compass. Why don't we start with the Jeep Compass? That's kind of an easy headliner. It's a relatively moderate refresh, but hey, I mean, for this show, that's what passes as the headliner. Any thoughts on this, guys?
Yeah, so the Compass, I mean, the thing about this reveal is that a few months ago, they kind of already showed it for the European market. But this is just kind of officially announcing it for the US market also. It's very much a refresh. Not a whole lot is different on the outside. It's got slightly different headlights and taillights, and it's got slightly tweaked bumpers and things. They also did a little bit of retuning. They tried to make the steering a little bit more responsive. They softened up the springs, stiffened up the rear stabilizer bar. Basically things to make it drive a little bit nicer. The big change, though, is the interior. It's got a much cleaner, kind of low and wide dash, which is kind of the popular style right now. It actually kind of looks like a baby version of the Jeep Grand Cherokee and Grand Wagoneer dashboards. Obviously not nearly as like flashy and wild, but it's got like an upholstered dash pad with nice stitching, and it's now got an infotainment screen that uses the Uconnect 5 system. So little tweaks like that should make it a lot nicer. Still uses the same engine as before, the 2.4 liter naturally aspirated 4-cylinder, 177 horsepower. Nothing crazy, nothing too underpowered. The front drive one gets a 6-speed automatic. The all-wheel drive ones get a 9-speed automatic. The Trailhawk is sticking around, so that has over 8 inches of ground clearance. And it's got the ultra-low first gear for a nice crawl ratio. And one of the other things is that they added a high-altitude trim package for the top-level Compass, and that adds body color, fender flares, and things. The one thing that we were kind of disappointed that they didn't announce was a 4xe version, because in Europe, you can get a plug-in hybrid version. but they haven't announced it for the U.S. yet. I tried poking one of the Jeep fellows to get some information. I got the usual no comment on future products, but he also reiterated what they said at the Stellantis EV Day, that Jeep is committed to getting a 4xe model in every segment. So it's like they can't confirm it, but also like it's going to happen at some point. So I'm looking forward to when that finally happens. I hope we don't have to wait until like a whole new generation.
Yeah, I think it was actually sort of in need of a refresh, if you will. That interior, that sounds like a nice step up. And we'll get into this. This was sort of the only real like reveal, sort of. I mean, the VW one is like literally a US reveal, which sometimes we wouldn't even cover. But any thoughts on the Jeep there, Zach?
Yeah. So, like you were mentioning there, this was like the only big reveal of the day, and Jeep actually did, sort of try its best to mimic what we've seen at auto shows past, with the way that it actually did the whole presentation. They drove the Compass up onto a giant rock. They came out there with a Wrangler 4xe doing the same, and then they also rolled out two Wrangler Recons, which are the big 35-inch tire package ones, and they really sent it up some hills that they had bought for the Chicago Auto Show there. So it was the most entertaining to watch reveal of the day, I think. And as you were mentioning there, Joel, the interior really is like the big thing with this one. I went over and sat in it after things died down a bit, and I really didn't like the Compass's interior beforehand, but sitting in this now, it really does feel like a mini Grand Cherokee L in there, and that all of that great stitching, a super responsive touchscreen that is like big and sort of tablet-like on the dash, looks really nice. Has a digital instrument cluster, like has all of these really nice new techie things, and it's still going to be a pretty cheap crossover. So, and they also had a Trailhawk version there with the red tow hooks and more body cladding. Just looks a little cooler. But at the same time, the high altitude trim that you mentioned, Joel, it has like, I want to say like 20-inch wheels on it or something like that, and like it actually has some presence, like for a small vehicle. It was a little surprising how luxurious that those wheels and the few little changes there jazzed up the exterior styling.
The high altitude, just looking at pictures, that looks like you guys point out, a rather expensive looking Jeep. Just in the pictures, you see some real presence there. And it's interesting too when you think about like how many people are going to take their Jeep Compass off-road and really need that sort of like creeper gear, like you mentioned there, Joel. But on the other hand, if you also think like from an off-road perspective, a smaller vehicle like the Compass is really like a nice little tool if you're going to go through like some tight areas. So there are some benefits for it. I mean, obviously, when you think Jeep, you think Wrangler. Obviously you think of like some of the luxurious models. But yeah, it's interesting. I actually drove a Cherokee off-road at the then FCA Proving Grounds, and they have a pretty nice little off-road course there. And I was talking to one of the Jeep designers and product guys, and they were like, yeah, everybody shows up and they want to take the Wrangler, but if you want to take the Cherokee or the Compass, you can have a lot of fun, because they're like, we'll admit, we don't like maintain all these trees and stuff. It's a little tight in here, and you can kind of just like really, carve that nice little, gap in there and go for it. So that's the Jeep Compass. Part of me almost can't believe we've spent this much time talking about a U.S. debut of a Compass. But hey, Jeep does a lot of cool things, and this is actually a pretty cool vehicle. So let's we'll get into the feel of the show here in just a minute, but let's talk about the VW news, which is also legitimately newsy. So take it away.
Yeah. So I was attending the Volkswagen press conference there. They actually did a combination Volkswagen press conference and a lunch,
Hey,
which will sort of tease the pizza chat that I'm sure we're going to have later. No, they of course had Chicago style pizza and hot dogs there. Oh, and also here are two Volkswagens. So this was the US spec GTI and the US spec Golf R, which Greg and I have actually already driven in Euro spec. But Volkswagen brought them here and they announced pricing at the same time. Once again, sort of like Jeep, they had a semi-interesting presentation for us to watch. They had a few Volkswagen guys get together and make a film, and they had every single generation of GTI and Golf R in the film, and they were all driving them around a racetrack. And Tanner Faust showed up, and did his little drifting thing, and it was just fun. And they had a Mark One GTI and an R32 Golf R at the presentation too, which, well, you can never go wrong with having those guys out there. But the big news today was the actual pricing. So GTI, if you're looking at the new Mark 8, which is a very, very good car, we've already proven that, starts at $30,540, and the Golf R at $44,640. So neither cheap. That's the GTI is no longer even in the $20,000 range, and the Golf R is nearing 45. If you get the DSG with the Golf R, it is well over $45,000. So very nice cars, but yes, there's some price creep going on there. They'll be definitely more expensive, say like the GTI versus the new Civic Si that Honda's coming out with. Those won't be in the same ballpark anymore. And one thing that I will note with the GTI that was the only thing that sort of irked me about it was the fact that they're locking in the adaptive dampers and the really awesome 19-inch wheels with summer tires on the top trim Autobahn, which is the most expensive version of the GTI at $38,990. So you can't optionally add in those really cool, like uber adjustable adaptive dampers in the $30,000 car. Got to go all the way up to a near $40,000 GTI to get that stuff, which it's just sort of irritating. Whereas the Golf R at its price, well, it has literally everything. There are no options on that thing. It has drift mode, the Nürburgring stuff, no options.
so it's interesting to actually kind of have this like sort of US debut kind of party for these two hot hatches, which I think is kind of a cool thing to do. Sometimes we're so far ahead of the curve here, like in the journalism like field, that you forget that, oh right, the general public is still approaching the GTI of the Golf R, whereas like we already drove it. So I think it's kind of cool, especially at an auto show like Chicago, which is a big consumer show, and a lot of enthusiasts. It's a Midwest city. People get into cars like that, so I think that's really cool. Cool. Any? I don't know. Did you see these? Did you see the VWs there, Joel? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I swung past briefly. Um, I mean, the big news really was the pricing, and
Yeah.
I'll defend the GTI's base price a little bit at around 30,000. That's still actually a couple thousand less than a Veloster N. And then you've got the Civic Type R that's up at around $38,000. Um, so a base GTI is still kind of all right. I still wish it would be a little bit cheaper, but it's been creeping slowly toward that $30,000 mark the last few years. So I'm not completely surprised by that. It is a bummer though that they would relegate those performance parts for the super high level trim, in part because that's expensive getting up there close to $40,000, and you'll actually, and I just said, it'll be at that point you are spending more than like what you would spend on Veloster N and on Honda Civic Type R, both of which offer more power, more performance. And then the Golf R is, I mean, for almost $45,000 is a lot of money for. I mean, granted, it's a heck of a Golf, but it is a Golf. That's a lot of money for that. I mean, getting into that price range, you could buy a pretty serious like Mustang GT or Camaro SS or something like that. But the Golf R, I think, has also always been kind of just generally expensive. And I think it is kind of it is a car that you buy because you've got to have a Golf R. Yeah, that's just kind of, and you'll just pay what you'll pay to get that Golf R. It's probably also why they offered it with the custom paint options a couple years ago, because that's a particular model that the VW enthusiast that just loves that car will just pay whatever it takes to get it.
I really, really loved those Spectrum options that they had before. They were expensive. You paid like an extra $2,000, but you got to pick from a color palette that was like 70 plus colors long. And there were some really, really cool ones in there. And you could get to the point where it's almost like a Porsche PTS thing, where there's like 2 or 3 in the world in this color because nobody chooses it and nobody actually goes to the dealer and is like, I want a special order, a Golf R in XYZ color, that they just have to go to the back room and be like, hey, do we make this color? Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Order it. Your car will be here in like 6 months. So I hope they do it again this year with the Mark 8 eventually. We'll see.
It's interesting too when you look at like the prices are a little higher than they've been in the past, and I think some of that is to be expected with the demise of the other Golf models. These are, they're actually VW and Hyundai with the Veloster. They're taking somewhat of a similar approach here, where it's like we keep the hot hatches and the mainstream hatches, if you will, where there already was a very limited audience, just go away, which from a business perspective makes total sense. I actually thought, especially in the Golf's case, that was a pretty good car. You got a fun little car for a pretty fair value, good engineering, interesting dynamics, but whatever, that's neither here nor there. But in light of like inflation, and I heard like the most recent like average new car cost was $41,000, I think in like May or June or something, somewhere in that ballpark. So when you start to look at that, it's like, well, okay, 30 grand for a GTI, I could get on board with that. I do feel like the Golf R pricing is going to be, it's not going to be problematic, because you're either going to say, hey, this is what I want and pay it, or you're not. But I still feel like that, the value proposition, I guess it does depend sort of on the things you value. I don't feel like it's there as much for the Golf R as it is for the GTI. But yeah.
Yeah, it's always been tough with the Golf R, but I honestly do think that this generation, more than any other, is worth the price, just because they've actually made it a lot more fun to drive. I was honestly never a huge fan of the previous Golf Rs. They were not, they were sort of like a GTI plus in the way that they drove. This is like its own thing. With the new torque vectoring rear diff, it really changes the driving experience for the better.
If you're a serious enthusiast looking to use your like Golf hatch as a tool, perhaps on the track or some very aggressive driving, that's where the Golf R could really reward you, like with that diff. It gives you just that added, more tools, if you will. And they used to, in my mind, I feel like they're still pretty well differentiated, but it's a little bit different than it was even 5-6 years ago, when it seemed like the Golf R, the GTI they were a little more different animals. Now, I don't know. I feel like they serve a little bit of the same purpose, but they approach it in slightly different ways.
One last thing that I'll bring up with kind of this VW pricing is that now that the GTI has moved up even a little bit more, I think this actually does make the Jetta GLI more appealing and stand out a little bit more because it's a few $1,000s less than a GTI, and you're getting basically the same powertrain as at least the outgoing Mark 7 GTI, and I think that's kind of cool. And so I mean, like if you can't quite make it to a GTI, you can still get a really good little performance Volkswagen.
Cool. So these were sort of like, as auto journalists, we like to talk about like what's new, what's a global reveal, what's the news. Sometimes we'll sort of like lower ourselves to talk about like a US debut or like pricing. Old school auto shows were like really what's the news. Chicago wasn't super newsy, as I think we've discussed at this point, but you did get to see a lot of things that we have seen on the internet, in magazines, wherever you get your news for the last like 18 months. And you guys got to see a lot of them in person for the first time. And some of these cars are like either on sale or pretty close to it. And it's like we're seeing them way after the fact. And some pretty cool concepts too. Things that like, you might not necessarily still be talking about a year or so after they first came out. So as you guys were walking the floor, what I think was cool, or what was cool for you guys to see just like in the flesh for the first time?
For me, my car of the show had to be the Nissan Z Proto. Seeing that thing in the flesh was honestly, fairly moving as far as sports cars go. It was cool. It was pretty neat because they had it, just across the way from the Toyota Supra, which is probably the car that one has in its sights more than any of the other competition. And they're actually about to reveal the production version of that Z in the New York Auto Show in like a month's time. But seeing the Proto, in yellow, all those retro cues to it, the super compact shape, even peeking into the interior, I really, really love the way this car looks. Like it is, I've sung the praises of the Supra's design because I think that's a really, really special car. But as I'm thinking and reflecting on it, I kind of like the way that the Z Proto looks even more. It really, really leans into that retro look, but grabs some fairly futuristic design characteristics as well, with the super neat rounded headlights, the almost like floating LEDs in those taillights, the Z script on the back. Everything about it really, really works. And the only qualm that I had with that car, seeing it on the internet, was the grille. Was that it sort of looked like this just like black, empty mass in the front. But when you actually walk up to it and see it in person, and you get to look at that, you see a lot more detail that actually comes through. There are some sort of oval-like shapes that are like squared off ovals in there. Some more lines and just generally interesting design going on. And it doesn't just look like this big black square in front there just to like have a big grille. It legitimately looks good, and I think it's a really, really great bit of design. So definite number one car and show for me.
That's very exciting. I can't wait to see that thing in the real world. And I honestly just maybe even for me skip it. I can't wait to see what they do in New York. That's going to be a lot of fun. Joel, how about you?
So probably the two cars that I was most excited to like get up close and personal with were the Nissan Ariya EV and the Kia EV6 electric car. Both of them were there, and the Ariya, I mean, I saw the concept revealed at Tokyo over a year ago, and I didn't pay a huge amount of attention then because it kind of looked like sort of a kind of generic crossover thing at the time. But what really got me interested in it was eventually when they showed the interior, which had just this really pretty, very simple, elegant dashboard with like really nice faux wood trim that had these cool buttons that were like integrated into that wood trim and cool lighting and stuff. And so I was really excited to check it out in person. And the interior pretty much holds up. It's got really cool details. One of the things that I really like, it's got ambient lighting in there that kind of these big light panels that then have sort of a detailed lattice work in front of it. And there's a little bit of distance between the actual light source and the kind of like lattice shade over it. So you get a lot of depth and dimension to it. And it kind of looks a little bit different as you like open up the door and see it from different angles. It's really neat. The switchgear looks really cool. It's got comfy Nissan seats. It's really neat. I'm excited to drive it at some point. And the EV6 is really cool. One of the advantages for that is that it looks great on the outside as well as on the inside. It's low, it's long, it's got a very muscular nose, it's got a cool fastback roof. They had it there in the GT line version, which has the body color fender flares. It looks great. The interior actually reminds me a little bit of modern Peugeots. It's got a slightly cyberpunk vibe to it with kind of very angular dashboard motifs, and it's got ambient lighting in there, like little streaks of light that look a little bit Tron and vapor wavy. It's a cool car, and that one is promising really impressive performance. It's the 2-wheel drive ones are rear wheel drive, and then all-wheel drive versions, there'll be an over 500 horsepower version of it, which should be pretty wild. I'm sure it'll be well out of my price range, but the more affordable like single motor rear drive ones should be a little bit more attainable. But yeah, both of them, the Nissan and the Kia, look really cool, and they've got me really excited about the future of EVs. Like they're very different takes. They're very unique. They don't really seem like other like gas powered cars. I'm very excited about them.
Yeah, both of those made some pretty big impressions on me as well. Hopping inside the area, Joel sort of prepared me for it as we were out there on the show floor. He was like, "Hey, you got to check this out because this is like really, really cool inside." And honestly, like even with the prep of like, "Hey, this is going to be really cool," it still blew past my expectations for what this was going to be like. The one like little thing with that car that I probably liked the most were the sort of like trim and wood integrated touch haptic buttons that they have on there. So instead of like your normal, like, I don't know, like glossy black plastic with some touch haptics that some cars have, these are actually like just integrated with wood trim on the back. So you tap away on this little plus button on the wood, change your temperature, and just control a whole number of things, which was really neat. And the EV6's interior was similarly impressive to me. Once again, some really, really neat uses of light in there, and just a super funky prindle that was sort of like a joystick that you like move right, up, left. Might take some getting used to actually when you actually do drive it. It is a little weird. But I tell you, it does not look like most Kias inside. A lot of them have, they're getting to a bit of a family look, but this sort of feels like a new generation, a new angle on their interior design, and that obviously follows through to the exterior too. It doesn't look like any any sort of a Kia that we've seen before, and I was pretty impressed. I was having a tough time pinning it down, honestly, just because it's sort of like wagon-like in shape, but it's such a steep rear, I guess, like rear angle line there, so it's sort of sport back, but then it's sort of lifted, but then it's the GT line with these colored fenders, and it's like it's so weird. Like I don't really even know what to call it, but it's good. It's a different kind of good, I'd say. So really, really neat to start seeing them on the road.
Cool. Now, this is probably the first time for you guys to see the Maverick in the Lightning in the flesh. Did you guys make it over to the Ford stand, or such as it was? And if so, I'm curious, what did you guys think of those things?
Yes. I will let you take it away, Joel, because I know that you noticed that first edition over there when you walked over with the Maverick.
Yeah, I was excited to check out the Maverick, and
yeah,
hopefully to kind of give an idea of scale. Like me standing next to it, I'm just a little bit shy of 6 foot. I'm like 5'11". The roof of the Maverick comes up to about my shoulder, so it's really not a huge vehicle, and I think it actually looks a lot better in person than it does in photos. In photos, I've always kind of thought that the grille and headlights look a little funny, but it looks a lot better in person. And it actually looks kind of low and pretty neat. I like it. And they had a first edition there, which is kind of an extra package you can get on top of the top trim Lariat. And it's got black stripes along the rocker panels, and it's got a big black kind of striped decal on the hood. And when you get right up close to it, you notice that it's got some texture to it, and that texture comes from a whole bunch of tiny first edition words printed out on that decal all along it. That gives it kind of some interesting texture. It's a neat package. When I posted about it on Twitter, it got some mixed reviews. Some people thought it was cool, some people thought it was tacky, but hey, you don't have to have it if you don't want it, so it's up to you. I think it's kind of neat. I can dig funky sticker packages. And other than that, like I think the Maverick is really cool. And I had sat inside, the cabin is roomy. It is a little bit on the narrow side, but like mainly just in the fact that you'll be sitting closer to your passenger than like in a gigantic F-150. Otherwise, it feels plenty roomy and comfortable. Seats felt pretty decent. I'm excited about it. And as for the Lightning, I didn't get up super close to it. It looks like an F-150, because it is. But I mean, I'm still excited about the Lightning because it offers a remarkable amount of electric power and capability for an impressive price.
Yeah, no. So just like you, I got up close and personal with both of those. I know that I crawled around the Lightning probably a little more than you, just because I was actually shooting some video with it. And it really does look like an F-150 with some light bars going across the front and back, which that's going to help Ford, because they make millions of these things, and allows them to bring the cost of an EV down. But there are some interesting design cues in there too. So like the Lightning script going across the rear fender there by the top of the bed, the T, the actual like going down of the T is a lightning bolt, which I thought was a cool little touch. The rear tailgate has a lightning bolt down there too, with sort of like what looks like an electrified American flag. So they're sort of leaning into that. It was also a Lariat trim, so it wasn't the the full $90,000 platinum that they will be selling. This one will be probably closer to around the like 60 to 60 some $1,000 range. So it had the gigantic 15-inch touchscreen inside that was pretty much just taken out of the Mach-E and is now being used in the F-150. I really, really like that big volume knob that they have on it there. That's one thing that I'd like to see if anybody does giant touchscreens like that take up the whole dash. It does a decent job of making the F-150's interior more high tech and look different than the gasoline one. But at the same time, I mean, you look around and okay, it's the same exact F-150 door, it's the same exact center console, it's the same trim. Like everywhere you look, it's like, okay, this is an F-150, but you just have that one giant screen indicator there that it's not. And maybe the actual gasoline one will get that big screen one day too. I don't think that would be a bad choice at all, seeing as the current one only has the big squared off 12-inch. But going back to the Maverick, as you were mentioning there, Joel, on the interior, I hopped in it, and because this thing, was sort of like Bronco Sport Escape based, it felt a lot like an Escape inside from the second that I hopped in. You're not sitting up super high like you do in a lot of pickups. The steering wheel straight out of an Escape, the gauges, a lot of the center stack looks very much like an Escape. Although I will say it looks a bit deeper, as in like there's more storage down there, there's more places to put things, and the actual screen has a bit of an offset to it with another storage space just sort of tucked up in there. So it seemed like a thoughtful interior in the way that the Bronco Sport had some thoughtful deviations from the Escape's interior. The one thing that I didn't get to do with the Maverick that I would have liked was sit in the rear seat just to see how much space there is back there. But for whatever reason, Ford had a mountain bike in the back seat. I don't know, just to sort of prove that I guess you can put a mountain bike in the back seat. So you couldn't actually get back there because that was mounted into the truck. But beyond that, pretty positive impressions of the interior.
Yeah, it's kind of an odd choice because there's a mountain bike in the bed in the back.
Yeah.
That it's like you could just move that, because they had that mountain bike in the bed, basically like square in the middle. And it's like, you could have just like scooted that over and had room for the other one too. But yeah, they may have been, I don't know. I guess if you were planning to use the bed for like car camping or something, maybe you would want to put the bike in the back seat or something.
Cool. So some interesting, I guess we'll say displays at the Chicago show. It sounds like there were a few quirks to the show, just as we talk about the mountain bike situation with the Maverick. First auto show since February of 2020. I think all three of us were actually at that show. I didn't make it this time, but this is the leadoff hitter, if you will. What was it like? You guys, I'll tease this out right now. Check out the notes package these guys put together. It's on our site. Really interesting. Gives you a nice flair of the show. Some really just in the moment pictures, things like that. Check out their Twitter feeds, all that good stuff. But we'll start with you, Joel. Just what was it like, man?
Yeah, it was, well, I mean, like it says in the headline of our story, it was weird. It just, well, so first off, there was only one media day. Most of these auto shows, they usually do like 2 media days. Give plenty of time for automakers to do their press conferences and for interviews, for getting videos and photos, all that kind of stuff. So it was just one day, and it was a pretty short day. The show floor opened at about 9:30 in the morning and was technically closed at about 2-ish, but they kind of left it open for people. So it was very short, and the show floor was not done when we got there. It was all still under construction, and I mean, like, there was no time to spare for them because the day that we were there, the following day was when it was going to open to the public. So it was like, this is the last day for them to finish everything up. So, in addition to a bunch of media people showing up, not every single car was on the floor yet. And there are forklifts buzzing around, moving stuff, little tractors, and a bunch of people building out displays, just various commotion and stuff. A number of times throughout the day, car alarms went off, which led to some poor staff member having to dig through a box of car keys trying to figure out which one is the one that's honking. The air conditioning was not on in the hall because they had the big doors open to bring in construction equipment and other display cars and stuff. It was all kinds of weird. It was all kinds of weirdness, and they were shuffling media kind of as one group from press conference to press conference, and they didn't want people just wandering around. The only reason I can think of for that was some liability thing where they were afraid that somebody might get whacked by a 2x4 or something and sue the Chicago Auto Show. But again, fortunately, they kind of got lax about that toward the end of the show, so people were allowed to kind of mix around a little bit more freely. But and again, that's not a normal thing for an auto show. Normally, media have pretty much the freedom to go wherever they want in the show hall, and everything is finished, and people are just kind of mingling and saying hi to people and talking to PR people, asking questions and things, just kind of whenever and wherever they happen to be. So it was a little strange for all that to. Oh, and air conditioning is usually on, which is a good thing for everybody wearing formal clothing and fancy or cheap jackets, depending on whether you're with an automaker or whether you're a journalist. Yeah, it was a strange event.
Yeah, the the air conditioning thing almost would have been nice to know beforehand. I know that they mentioned in their emails that, hey, it could be a little warm, like, yeah, you might want to wear some casual clothes, yada yada. But no, the air conditioning was just off. So, I would describe, the feeling on the floor of, sort of swamp-like, sort of feels like the Everglades, or like you're down in the bayou in Louisiana.
Yeah, I was joking with Zach when we were at the Jeep display, because they had all these like spruce pines and kind of mountainous rocks and stuff, and I was like, really, they should have brought in like some palm trees and like some mangroves and some like Spanish moss, kind of swampy type environmental obstacles for their Jeeps to drive up onto, instead of this cool mountain air vibe that they were going for.
Exactly. No, I regretted my jacket almost instantly. I know everybody had theirs off that could have theirs off, because yeah, it was hot. It got especially hot as soon as if you're doing any kind of filming under the lights, standing by a vehicle, getting into vehicles that of course are baking in there without air conditioning. It's all just sort of hot and muggy and a very, very weird atmosphere. To your point there, Joel, about the construction, it was certainly, a bit weird having all that going on. But I also found it, semi-fascinating to watch the auto show come together in the way that it was, because that's something that we don't normally see. We'll walk in and all the displays are perfect. The lights are on, the music is blaring, the cars are all primed and primed, and it's a show, it's a display. But no, we got to see a little peek behind the curtain of like how all of that comes together. It was, I don't know, probably a couple hundred workers just, constant buzzing around, cranes going up, trying to put up big displays, them trying to perfectly position all the cars. They back up, they pull forward, they back up, they pull forward. It's all just to get it in this perfect, line as they're doing the whole display around there. And they're jacking up cars on jack stands to plug them in so that you can get the accessory power to them. And no, it was an event in and of itself there. And I know you also mentioned, Joel, that like soft closing at about 2 p.m. It was technically closed, but also sort of open. But you could tell at about 2, their construction efforts ramped up a good amount, because they were like, all right, the media are supposed to be gone. And they turned on some massive fans, and I don't know if they just brought in more construction equipment or what, but anybody trying to do any sort of a video or interview after 2 p.m. With any of the cars or engineers there, good luck, because it sounded like the Chicago Amtrak train station from when I arrived, where it's just sort of this like deafening bellow if you're in the wrong place. I know I was joking with some of the guys there that were their main thing, they're there to film video, and they're just like, yep, it's impossible now, I guess I'll just hang it up and leave. They obviously need a lot of time doing that, so they didn't finish in the time that we were being ushered around by herded like sheep from display to display. And I feel like I should also mention just like the wild differences in the actual press conferences. Some of them, they felt half normal, like the Jeep one. They had Jim Morrison hopped up there, did a whole presentation with a few cars. They had some cool stuff to climb the Jeeps onto. But then you walked over to Toyota, and it's just a guy reading off of a sheet of paper. You can tell he's just got scribbled notes on there. There's no music. There are no cars moving around. It's just like some static displays and running through specs of a car. Which is obviously very different from what we're used to seeing with their usual big shows that they put on. So it was really cool just to see all of those different types of things that the automakers had planned for this super weird show.
Yeah, and like the guy that did the Toyota presentation was the same guy that did the Lexus presentation, and somewhere in between he had time to go and change out of his Toyota shirt into a Lexus shirt.
Maybe he was just hot from the overwhelming heat, it sounds like, and he had to change. I don't know.
That was definitely a benefit of doing both of them.
I could have gone for a shirt change at some point during the day for sure. I was as I think about it now, I'm a little jealous of him.
There was a running joke, like probably when the Frankfurt and Paris shows were still frankly, going on. I mean, Frankfurt is going to be Munich this year, but they were always in like the very end of summer, like first like week of fall. And the running joke among the journalists was like, well, did you bring an extra suit? You just sweated through your first suit. And that kind of sounds like what this was like, only this was mid-July. There was some, like, I always thought the organizers just were like too cheap to pump enough air conditioning through like those halls in Europe. But it was like, a September auto show, maybe you don't have to blast the AC. I don't know. You guys sound like you needed those things you see at like football games where the fan is blasting like cold air onto the sidelines with streamers coming at you. So,
Well,
yeah,
and
geez.
I was joking with someone that I was like, yeah, I mean, it's hot and humid, but like if this was like the Frankfurt Auto Show, this is what the temperature would be like when they supposedly had the air conditioning on, because they keep things warm in Europe.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like it was a very interesting show. Thanks for taking over for the team there, guys, and doing it. We'll see what New York is like. And then there'll be Motorbella coming up. That's sort of like the placeholder this fall for the Detroit Auto Show. That's in that slot we were just referencing, kind of late September. So hopefully we get fall weather here in Michigan as opposed to blistering heat, which could be either. Then more auto shows. So it's good to have him back. No spend my money this week, but do send your questions to podcast@autoblog.com. We'll close things out, though, with if you're going to spend your money, what kind of pizza are you going to get? You were in Chicago. I've covered the show many times. It's like you literally get out of your car, get off the train, get off the plane. It's like there's like a deep dish pizza stand in your face. They're very proud of their pizza. There's a number of kinds of pizza you could eat in this world, from like New York style, Detroit style, which I think many of us are biased towards, Chicago style. Then there's some other more regional ones. I actually experienced New Haven pizza, which is kind of like a thinner but also very cheesy pizza out east a couple years ago. Really good with an IPA. Where do you guys fall on the great pizza debate? Why don't we start with you there, Zach?
Yeah. So just like you said, you hop off the train here in Chicago and your pizza in your face. I had breakfast pizza for breakfast the day of the show. I had, and that was basically just like glorified quiche. Honestly, it was like egg with veggies and whatnot. There was no sauce in
Okay,
there.
that sounds pretty
Then
good.
I also
Then.
had, yeah, exactly. It was like that with the pizza crust, and I was like, this is really good, actually. And then I had just your traditional Chicago style, like just a pepperoni pizza for lunch. But if I'm ranking my pizzas, I'm gonna have to put Chicago style last. Just like you said, I am biased toward Detroit style. That's definitely number one. You go to Buddy's, go to like a Crispelli's and get their deep dish. Really, really good Detroit style pizza, nice and crispy, and really great crust. Then number two, it's got to be New York style. I've been to New York a couple times, and I have lots of friends there. So I went to school in Syracuse, so I'm probably biased here. So I've had more than enough people show me really, really great New York pizza, and that's like a close second behind Detroit. And I will argue that Chicago style is not really even pizza. It's more like a casserole. It's not bad, but it's not a pizza you can pick up with your hand and eat it how pizza is meant to be eaten, as far as I'm concerned.
All right, Joel, you're shaking your head. Let's get some rebuttal here.
Yeah, so I've been a long time backer of Chicago pizza, and I mean, even if you don't necessarily consider it pizza, I still think it's better than New York pizza. Um, it's just a whole lot of goodness all in one package, and like, I mean, I don't know, I prefer something like that as opposed to kind of a greasy foldable rollable slice. Um, that being said, and for a long time, Chicago pizza was like my go-to pick. But having lived in kind of Metro Detroit for a while and having experienced like really good Detroit pizza and stuff here, I think Detroit really has kind of become my favorite. Um, Actually, in some ways, it's almost kind of a good in between New York and Chicago. Um, I mean, you can still eat it with your hand, but it's it's cooked in kind of a deep pan, and so you get a lot of goodness. You get a lot of toppings and cheese, and I think the crust is actually what really really makes Detroit pizza, because it's got a nice kind of crispy, kind of buttery outside with kind of a soft and nicely textured kind of inside. It's a really good mix of like everything that you get in like really good bread. um, and then you get a good chunk of toppings on top. Like I've really become a fan of Detroit pizza, and even the rest of my family that for the longest time was like big backers of Chicago pizza have kind of come around to Detroit. Um, but Chicago is a very close second for me, and then New York is kind of a distant third.
I'm really interested in what this New Haven pizza is, Greg, because it's something I haven't heard of before you mentioned it.
It's a little bit of it's a variant, if you will, of New York pizza. So it's somewhat of a similar style, like relatively thin, kind of like a hand-tossed crust, conventional toppings. And it's available in New Haven, Connecticut. It's like a East Coast kind of thing. I was out there a couple summers ago and I really enjoyed it. It went really good with like an IPA, kind of a big green salad, like all pizza does. Um, but I think there's a little bit more of an emphasis on the sauce, at least the places I experienced it at. So I thought it was good. I thought it was actually, I liked it a little bit more than the sort of like New York, traditional New York style, which I feel like is very, it's almost like traveling pizza. I feel like, there's this emphasis on like folding your slice. I don't like to fold my pizza. It's not really how I roll. Um, and the places that I had New Haven pizza at, one was almost like they brought it out on this cart and then it was sliced into like squares. And it was just the most amazing thing. And it was so thin. And I ate literally like 7 pieces and it just went down so easily. It was great with a beer. So, I would say this, it wouldn't be my go-to, but it would be just a different kind of thin style pizza that is really good in the summer too. So that's good. My personal order would be Detroit #1, hands down. #2 is Chicago. I really like Chicago pizza. I think there's a little bit of a Detroit-Chicago rivalry. So sometimes I think there's almost like the two fan bases and food and sports like to just sort of be against each other regardless. It's like you can't like Chicago pizza because that's like rooting for the Chicago Bears or something. But I like it. I think it tastes pretty good. I love the deep and like just like the volume of cheese you get. So I think that's good. New York is pretty good pizza. I would put that. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to stop. I'm going to make New Haven third, then New York fourth, just because. But I will say this: I like New York pizza. Whenever I go to the New York Auto Show, I always get a couple slices, and like I will sort of end with just saying I like all pizza. Like I could eat pizza every day of my life, have no problems with it. I enjoy all the different variants. So yeah, I mean, I think they're good. And I will say this. I think sometimes with Detroit style, even though it is my favorite, if you get one that's like maybe a little bit overdone or a little bit underdone, and I think this also applies to Chicago, there's like less room for error there. Like you're more likely to get almost like a bad batch or something. Like, oh, they burned the crust, or oh, there's not enough cheese or sauce. Whereas the other ones, which, I will say this, New York pizza is almost like pizza, like standard pizza. There's a little more room for error, so.
No, I completely agree. I've had some Detroit style pizza that the crust just wasn't crispy enough and it ruins the whole experience. Honestly, it's a fragile thing. When they get it right, it's the best. And it sounds like we all agree on that Detroit is the best. So shocker, three guys from Detroit all think the Detroit pizza is the best.
Yeah, I mean, I can at least say that like I'm not originally from Detroit and I honestly hadn't really experienced Detroit pizza until actually I think I first tried that type of pizza when Little Caesars introduced the deep dish option to their menu nationwide, which honestly is a pretty decent pizza. It's not like if you come to Detroit, you should really get like Buddies or Jets or something like that. But if you can't get to Detroit, the Little Caesars deep dish is not a bad way to dip your toe into Detroit pizza.
I would agree with that. Little Caesars, what do they call it? The deep dish, whatever it is pretty good. I almost can't believe I'm saying that with a straight face, but it's pretty good.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I definitely agree with, like, you do have to get it right. Like, if you get it wrong, it's not brilliant. And actually, I think the same goes for Chicago pizza.
Yes.
Like, there have been a couple of times that I've been to one of kind of like the famous pizza places that, I don't know, they were just having an off night, and it ended up being actually kind of disappointing. I was like, wow, that was really unfortunate. So yeah, I do agree. There's more room for error, and it's a sad thing when it goes wrong.
Oh, because you're so excited, and you don't necessarily have that style of pizza as much, perhaps. And then you get there, you're like, oh, it's not cooked quite right, or where's the sauce? Or I almost can't believe I'm saying this. You can have too much cheese on a Chicago style pizza, I think. It's like if it doesn't totally cook or melt right. And like for me, I'll be like almost like choking on it. I'm like, what is this? You have to really like saw into it. But that's a pretty rare occurrence. And even then, you can sort of compensate by just really getting out the knife and fork and chopping it up. So,
and I do agree. I mean, pretty much any solid pizza is good pizza. It's like it's as much as we debate which is the best, pizza's good.
I think I'll let that.
Pizza is good.
We can let that be the final line. Send us your feedback about pizza and your Spend My Monies, and then any other questions you want us to talk about. We love doing mailbags every now and then. That's podcast@autoblog.com. Everybody be safe out there. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next week.